Hey, welcome. This is The Process. My name is Dr. John Bush. We are covering lesson 128. I'm starting about a 10 video uh, series here on consistency of the mean fantasy points. And it's looking historically. It's going to be looking at positions, maybe even some teams, and it's meant to be used as reference class forecasting material. If you don't know what that is, go find that lesson on reference class forecasting. I hesitated to do this series because this is going to be something that hasn't been seen before that I know about, and I'm actually going to take you through a lot of data and statistical analysis of that data. And again, that is so rare in the world of fantasy football informatics. So, kind of once the genie gets out of the bottle, then there you go. So, there's always a debate on some of my material. Do I just keep it or do I let it fly? And since I now have the Science of Fantasy football website that myself and D Mike are own, I thought, okay, I'm going to throw it out. I probably would not have shown these uh, materials unless that was the case. And just to let you know, to answer your question, does that mean you got more secret stuff? Yep. Okay. Not you just, I'm not going to show everything. Okay. And I suspect some of the Twitter pundits out there have a lot of interesting findings and research that is just not going to be public. There's, daily fantasy sports, big high stakes money leagues. There's a lot of money on the table. And when you make information available, then it becomes less valuable in such a situation. Okay. It's kind of like at the horse racing. If the trainer told everything and was super honest about every horse, then the times that they could make some money on, say, a horse doing something different or coming back after an injury or something, they would not make as much money as they do on the side betting. So that's just out there. Okay. And I suspect players and teams, there's material that we just never will know, and secret stuff and game plan, and it's just out there. So it's going to be unknowable. And you might look at my discussions on uncertainty, okay? Because that adds to the uncertainty of fantasy football, something that we can't, we don't even know we don't know. I'm telling you, there's stuff out there. We just, I, all I know is what I do, okay? But I suspect there's a lot more. So you should pay attention, see what's out there, think about it. Appreciate you listening to my journey here. Okay, I started off this series from 2014 to 2021. So that's, was it 7, 8 years, something like that. And I took my database of quarterbacks, running backs, tight end, and wide receiver. And I looked at the average weekly median fantasy points per game. Median means in a population that is exactly at the 50 percentile or the 1/2. You're saying, I thought the average was that. Averages can be skewed, right? Right. So just be aware of that. Median takes some of that skewing and gives you I think, a more accurate picture in a range of data. At least that was my thinking. Okay. And if you've listened to my lessons before, I have calculated what I call EOS, end of season points per game. And I've divided the total, and it's usually by a year, let's call it a pie, and I've divided it into quadrants or fourths. So the top pie, the best players are producing the top 25%. And on this chart here, it's 100 to 75 percentile, okay, points per game. The next slice going down is 74 to 50th, so that's kind of above average, but not the best. Then slightly below average is 49 to 25th, and the bottom of the barrel, for whatever reason, 0 to 24. And I also got an average across that whole thing, and you can look at quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers. And you can see that in fantasy points, and this is PPR, okay, full point PPR. Quarterbacks have and make about double the average weekly median fantasy points per game over the period of 14 to 2021. 9.6. About half of that, it's close to 10. About half of that is running backs, 5.2. Wide receivers, 5.5. So unsurprisingly, wide receivers and running backs are producing about half of quarterbacks. And then tight ends on average in a normal situation, not a tight end premium, it's about 3.3. So just on, if you had a 4-team or 4-player fantasy team, 1 quarterback, RB, tight end, and wide receivers, then on average, quarterbacks would be the highest, tight ends would be the lowest, and there'd be probably some variation in your 4-team or the 4-player of the RBs and WRs. And then I give you then below the grand total, the grand average in each slice of the end of the season pie. Okay. You can look across and see what's what, and you can see the amount of fantasy points. So in the top fourth, it's 16 fantasy points per game. And again, that's skewed by the quarterbacks. And what's interesting, that in this slice, quarterbacks are not that much higher than RBs and WRs. Okay, so I just said across everything, quarterbacks were. But if you look at the top tier, the top quarter, it's much closer. So what happens is quarterbacks are doing whatever they're doing across these pie pieces, but the best of the best RBs and wide receivers and tight ends are producing a lot more than in the weaker slices and whatnot. So There is some differences there, and you need to see that and be familiar with that. So any methods and processes that allow you to preseason pick and predict what players will be in the top quadrant is going to put you ahead of the situation. Okay. So it is worth our time to put a lot of effort into this journey. A lot of people don't. That's fine. Okay. They're the reasons, right? They're working hard to make it easier for us. We do appreciate it. And that it is what it is. And you can look at the rest of the data and the different pie thing, pie slices as well, and kind of see where the break points are and the differences. So you can see some of the worst quarterbacks are starting to below average, really, in that below average quadrant, 49 to 25th. They're about roughly double wide receivers and running backs. So they're really falling off wide receivers and running backs. So in the populations, right, it is not a linear kind of decline. It is definitely not a normal distribution of this. So there are ways that if you really wanted to get deep, you have to use methods and thinking to remember that we're not a normal distribution. Okay, if you're a stats person, you understand that. Okay, you may not need to research that, but if you're curious about that journey, go look that up. Next slide. So this is just a bar graph showing you in a visual way what I just showed you in the tabular way. Okay. I like to look at the visual. So I've divided again the pie into the season for the last 7, 8 years, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So it's 8 years. Okay. I use my fingers to count. You can see the distance between the quarterback and some of the others. RBs are kind of next, then wide receivers, then tight ends. So there's a natural tendency, especially in the top quarter, to have that hierarchy. So that kind of flies in the face of the zero RB. Remember, this is end of the season. This is not preseason. The issue and the reason ZRRB can work is the injury risk or the injury uncertainty is higher in running backs than wide receivers. So the idea is you get lucky and find some really good injury-free running backs for your season. If you can do that, the top 12 RBs of the season and you grab them and they're injury-free, you're probably going to do fairly well. The reason the ZRB came into existence is because people can't predict injury futures. Okay. You can make some assumptions, high usage, more time, more chance to get injured. There's some of these kind of concepts and so-called injury prone. It's a little harder there to figure that out. Age is in there. I've done a whole series of videos on the age. So just kind of think about that in your journey. This is definitely, uh, you know, pretty sophisticated material here. Next slide. Okay, so if we look year to year, 2014 to 21, and we look at the positions, okay, and then I invented a metric, okay, people do in this business, predict and make funny metrics with abbreviations, right? Okay. Uh, I call it the CompStat, counts over the median. Okay. I look across at every quarterback in each year and count how many weeks that they returned fantasy points per game above the median that I just established with my 8-year first slide. Okay. So I counted that. So it's a number kind of thing. Okay. So counting. Uh, as most fantasy football data goes, there is going to be a variation. Okay. It would all be neat and sweet if all you have to do is do 1 year and then you figured, the key to the kingdom. That is not the case. Lots of variability here. And you can look at the averages for the positions. So if we look at ComScores, 18%, so quarterbacks, roughly 18% of them had counts above the median. This is every quarterback, even those that didn't start or started every once in a while or a few games during the season for an injury, whatever, COVID, whatever. Okay, so this is throwing everybody into a pool, right? All the quarterbacks. CRBs, because if you put them all back in the pool, not just the tops, there's going to be some RBs that don't get a lot of opportunities. They're 8% across that 8 years. Tight ends, which is interesting, I thought, 13%. Okay, even though they produce less fantasy points per game at the end of the season, as far as a consistency, and I think scores measure that consistency, tight ends are more consistent than probably people give them credit for. Okay. In fact, I've never seen this data before. You won't have either. And very few will see my lessons, so they won't know it as well. Too bad for them. And wide receivers, it's about 10%. So probably unsurprisingly, RBs are at the bottom here as far as consistency. Again, this is all RBs, right? These are some that maybe get a few starts a season. Okay, I just threw everybody in. And why do you want to do that? I like to know kind of the foundation of my metrics. Okay, I can then look at different slices, right? I like to look at the whole forest, okay, and then decide maybe where I need to go bird watching, right? Where the woodpeckers might be or whatnot, okay? I go top down. And to me, this is looking at everybody. That's a top down research approach. I've got some lessons on top down versus bottom up. So you need to, I think, deal with that. Okay, so here it is. And then you could look across at the totals. And what's interesting is the scores across the years are fairly consistent. It's just there's a lot of variation within the positions. Slide 4. Slide 5. I did the trend lines, average counts over median versus position, 14 to 21. And you can look at the trend lines. Quarterbacks are the highest. And you see that over the last 8 years, quarterbacks kind of peaked in 15, dropped in 17, peaked again in maybe 19, 20, and 21 went down. But look Look at the distance between the quarterbacks in the last couple of years and the tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs. It's actually started to separate more. I think quarterbacks are returning more consistent value in the last few years. So people, for whatever reason that's occurring, okay, maybe moving towards more pass happy, whatever, rushing quarterback, whatever's going on right now, things have changed since 2014. Okay, in tight ends, wide receivers, running back. Running backs are almost dead flat. Wide receivers have dropped and have come back some, but they're pretty flat. The tight ends have decreased, and they haven't. They started high and then they've dropped. So there is a little bit of concern for all tight ends that maybe where whatever's going on, they're not going to return as much as we would like them to as far as being consistent. So there may be, this is kind of to me, I consider this a consistency metric. And so tight ends are becoming more inconsistent, at least in this window of 8 years. And you've got to look beyond a year or two. Okay. So in your draft plans, this needs to be considered. Slide 6. So I had done, right? I had done all the pieces of the pie. Now let's just look at the top piece of the pie, top 25%. So I call that positional rank sector, 175%. We have the year, the positions, the grand average across that year, and then what I say is the dominant positions as far as consistency that year. So I kind of do the work for you. Okay. So if we go down, we see quarterbacks have really come up in the top tier since 2018. Really, 2020 was the year for the quarterbacks. 2017 was the worst. Isn't that in? Look at that. It's almost double. What is going on? So that should tell you something. Even in the top classes there, the top type of quarterbacks, things can be really variable. So you think you know, but that kind of data should give you pause, right? You think you know where the landmines are, but do you really? And then I have the totals across the way, and notice that quarterbacks for the 8 years about 44%, something like that. RBs peaked in 18, and notice in the last 2 or 3 years they have really crashed. Lots of up and downs. In the last 3 years, it's been a sad time. 2015 was the worst RB, and yet that was, I happened to go zero RB for a lot of my money leagues, and I won a boatload of money in 2015. So that year probably contributed to the zero RB feelings. Let's call it feelings. I'm not sure there's data to say it's something you should do or you shouldn't do. Let's just call it feelings. Tight ends have been really pretty good, but then they have variation. Last 2 years have been really the worst in the last 8. So we've been seeing a decline. WRs have kind of been fairly flat, but last couple years, about, it is what it is. So the dominant uh, positions from 2014 to 2021. So last year, dominant quarterback, wide receiver. The year before, quarterback, wide receiver. So the year of COVID, the last two, people say, well, COVID didn't seem to have an effect. I'm wondering, is this kind of decline here due to some COVID phenomenon? Be aware of that. It wouldn't surprise me that we have consistency domination in WRs and quarterbacks. So that would tend to favor 0RB. Be aware. Be aware. Okay. And that's different from 18 and 17, 16 even, 15 for sure, 14. So there's a lot of variation. And what you think happened last year, if you look scale back up, it's more variable than you think. I'm just letting you know, consistency wise, there's more variation than you think there is. You're going to miss it. You're in the middle of the minefield and you don't even know it. And I don't care what the folks on Twitter squawk about. Remember, they're going to squawk. They're on a perch. Nobody wants the silent parrot. You don't buy a parrot to sit there. You want it to squawk and cause a ruckus and, you know, all sorts of crap. They're not going to use stats, a lot of them, because there's not statistical experts out there, right? I just did a thing on the expert problem in fantasy football. That is dead serious, that article. Hear what people say. I'm not going to call out individuals, but come on, you know, any fool can get on podcasts now and flap their chops. Sad. That's all I'll say. You want to hear my opinion? It's sad, but that's fine. It's just hard for people to weed through the smoke and the squid ink to get to the bottom and the foundation and understand there are people such as D. Mike and myself. We live for the science of fantasy football, and I hope you listen. We have a podcast. We do the Data Lab podcast. It is time to get serious. If you're listening this far and you put up with me, then you must be damn serious. Okay. So I hope I'm helping you. Okay. Because there's no money in this. If you want to do this for a living, you better get a welfare or something because there's no money here. Okay. Unless you're, big empty suit on ESPN or something, whatever. Here is the trends. If you look at the data, the averages in the top quarter, a lot closer than we saw previously. Look at quarterbacks. Okay, coming in at some of the worst in the last couple of years. RBs are the orange. They're, at the worst. I'm sorry, quarterbacks are what? Blue. Blue's the highest in the list. So last 2 years, 2021, we're talking WRQBs. I think COVID has knocked down tight ends and RBs. Okay, I'm not sure we're not going to continue that trend. So that would be my trend. If that is a true trend, and notice there's variation, that might actually tell us to maybe do a little bit more 0RB drafting this year. Okay, does that mean every league you draft? I do probably 50 or more. So I'm going to have some that I'm going to do 0RB. You want to be there. That's kind of a diversification of your portfolio situation. Okay. And there's some higher thinking required for portfolio stats and mathematics. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. But there are people out there that probably use that to try to mitigate uncertainty, but you really can't. the best you can do is make the black swans gray. That's it. Sorry, I had more of an answer for that question. So here's the 8 years. And so what I then did, because to me, in a top down view, you have to look across the landscape. So in this case, I subtracted from each data point the 8 year COM positional average. And that lets us know what years were above or below the positional average. So it kind of tells you how things are going for me recently. What have you done for me recently? Here's quarterbacks. Look, 2018 to 21, we're much better than the preceding years. Look at that, almost a complete split here. Okay, so quarterbacks have gotten more consistent here in fantasy points. Is that more rushing? Is that younger ones? Is that favoring coaches? In other words, are what we're seeing fitting what's there right now? And if there's things change, then this will go back to maybe something in this world. Just be aware. When you think the ice is thick, sometimes it can start cracking on you. So just be aware. Right now, right, was it past performance does not predict future performance? All we can say is this is what's been happening in the last 4 years for quarterbacks. RBs, remember I said COVID was not our friend. Look, we've had the worst 2 years, actually worst three, 19. Look at that. Have you heard anybody squawking about consistency going down? No, I'm still listening. You're not going to hear it. People don't have time to do this, right? Folks, this is not something that you can whip out here. Okay. I've been a scientist, I feel like all my life, but since the 1970s, got my science degree in 1981, got a master's 84, PhD 91, written numerous journal articles, brought in grant money, mentored, taught, okay, been doing data analysis, statistical thinking, scientific methodology, okay, been doing that. So that's who you should listen to. The fact that I don't get a lot of that is too bad, so sad. Okay. When I started fantasy about 2010 or so, I wish somebody like me would have already been there. Sure would have cut my learning curve. Here it is, folks, on a platter, ready for you to go. Put that on a cracker, dude. Okay. So, tight ends, last 2 years, not good compared to the 8 year average here. Very uncertain. Last year was the worst for tight ends. So, people look and they maybe didn't even realize how bad of a down year tight end consistency was. I don't know if they did or didn't. It makes you wonder, are some of the high value tight ends worth that given the lower consistencies? Just be aware that's out there. Okay? Wide receivers, the last 2 years have been fairly good, above, uh, the 8 year average. Certainly 2020 was, and 2021 was about 2% above. Not bad. But 2019 and 17 were bad years, terrible years. The dominant in the last 2 years have been quarterback, wide receivers. That puts it right in the hands of the zero RB drafting. People say, why should we zero RB? They really never have a reason, do they? Oh no. Here's some data, folks. Dear pundits, Dr. Bush has the data right here. This is what, and again, this is only looking backwards. Who knows what's happening 2022, but here it is. Okay. It's just, is this random or is this really trendy trends? Slide 9. Last slide. I know you're probably asleep by now. I visually place these 8-year averages, comparison averages by year, by quarterback, RB, tight end, and wide receiver. So you can look and see what's up, what's down, right? Tops and flops. Look at 2021, the tops, QBs, WRs. The year before, QB, WRs. 2019, it's all about that tight end boss. Okay, a little bit of quarterback. 2018, all about the RB. Here's RB 17, RB 16. Bad year for RB 15, back to 14. So if you use 0 RB 14, 16, 17, 18, it may have been a lean time. If you used it in 15, and I did, you probably collected sackfuls of money. Last couple years, you may have been successful. So now you think, oh, what happened last 2 years? I figured this game out. When you actually start believing that you figured it out, that's when you should really get worried. Okay? Just telling you, that's not what you should be thinking. Okay. I've taken you down this path. I've been dead serious about how this is about. I've given you some reasons for things that are out there that people have no clue as to what's going on. They don't. Okay. So be aware of who you're listening to. Go read my expert problem diatribe. Okay. Article. Hope this helped you. We've got, I think, 9 more videos to talk about. And you're thinking, you mean we're not done? No. You mean I have to actually come back and learn more, or I can't just stop now and make money? Okay. No, you can't. It every year, every day, you have to be pushing forward, trying to learn something new. If that's not who you are, if you just want to slap something down, then you hadn't even made it this far, so you wouldn't even be listening to me. Congratulations, those that have listened and had this lesson. This is Dr. Bush for the process. This is so much fun. Take care. Come back. More lessons coming.